in the room today do not interfere in the proceedings, and as soon as the hearing is closed, please leave quietly. So I'm Deputy Catherine Curtis, the chair of the panel.
Connétable Mark Labby, Vice Chair.
Deputy Pore, panel member.
Deputy Helen Miles, panel member.
Constable Richard Vibert, Minister for Children and Families.
Deputy Malcolm Ferry, Assistant Minister for Children and Families.
Keith Posner, Interim Chief Officer for SIPES.
Andrew Heaven, Assistant Director of Policy.
Alexa Munn, Head of Governance and Digital for SIPES.
Okay, thank you everybody. We've got 1.5 hours for this hearing. So I'll start with questions, quite a general question to start with. Minister, online harms refer to a range of negative experiences and risks that people can encounter while using the internet. So based on your understanding of the current legislation and policy, please can you share what you consider to be the top 3 protections that children in Jersey currently have from online harm? So it's not about what's in process, it's about what they already have.
So current protections, legally we have Article 51 offence of improper use of telecommunications system, and that's used as a catch-all for all forms of abuse. Obviously it's a fairly old law, it's almost 20 years old now, but it is still there as a catch-all for many of the offences for which we are going to enhance. You've got the Data Protection Jersey Law 2018 that grants people, and that's adults, children, a range of specific rights that they can exercise over their personal data. And of course, a child must be 13 in order to consent for their data to be used. Under that age, then it must be a parent or guardian who would do that on their behalf. And then we've got another law that was introduced long before these harms were seen, the Computer Misuse Jersey Law 1995, and that protects children and establishes a legal framework to deter and penalise unauthorised malicious use of computer systems and data. So it wasn't specifically designed in its day for what it's used for, but it is effective again in dealing with many of the things we see today. Is there anything else that we want to?
I think in relation to data protection legislation, there are already quite robust features in the law that allow people to stop processing and ask for assessments to be made. So there is already a suite of tools amongst the data protection legislation that can serve to protect people from online harms.
So do you consider these to be sufficient? Because we just heard this morning about that the police had a 90% increase in reports of online crimes involving young people last year compared to the year before.
I think, any increase is concerning, and what we are looking at doing in the slightly longer term is to obviously enhance the legislation that's in place and perhaps look at the data protection framework and how that can be changed and maybe new legislation brought in to give individuals greater protection against online harms. Although the data protection legislation does provide a level of cover at the moment, I think if we look at the way that the UK has gone with their legislation, it's more of a controlling the platforms, whereas the vision that we would have would be to empower citizens to take a more proactive stance to ask platforms to take content down.
Okay, and that vision, what evidence have you had to back up that vision?
So I think it's what's achievable in the sort of shorter term. I think if you look at the Online Safety Act, I think some of the first things that you notice is lots of 350 staff have needed to be taken on just to administer the legislation. So it's quite an expensive route to giving people those protections. And I think that the Minister and I attended a conference for the NSPCC, and the feeling at that conference was actually that the Online Safety Act in its current form wasn't really doing what it was designed to do, which was to protect people from online harms. Appreciate that it's only the first suite of the legislation. There will be further laws enacted in the UK, but our approach of taking a sort of bottom up rather than a top down is probably the better way to go to empowering citizens.
So that was just the NSPCC believed that the Online Safety Act wasn't the best way to protect children from online harm.
They didn't believe that it was, in its current form, that it was actually achieving what it was set out to
Or that it
originally
would achieve that. Ofcom themselves don't believe that they'll be able to achieve successful prosecutions under that law. Even though they've taken on 350 staff. The complexity of the law is such that I would imagine once you get defence lawyers for these large companies, they will be able to prolong any case for years. And that's the problem with a complex law. It plays into the hands of the legal defence system.
But that's quite interesting then. I didn't know that the NSPCC did not believe that the Online Safety Act was the right way to go for protecting children from online
I
harm.
think the feeling at the time was that, they hadn't particularly been consulted, and if they had, they would have come up with a different solution.
That's interesting because I did actually speak to them myself before at the start of this, but we'll leave that for now
sure.
then.
I mean, another thing about that legislation is that this is a constantly moving target with new developments online all the time. If you have a complex law, changes to it will take longer.
And so you think that it would be more effective for Jersey to have its own suite of laws which will require updating?
Yes, and relatively lighter legislation in that, not as cumbersome, and something that, is fairly agile to change as and when necessary.
And when I asked about the evidence for that vision of not having it with so much legislation, the evidence was about what was achievable in the short term, because otherwise it's expensive and lots of staff could be required. But do you think that's the right way to formulate policy?
Yeah, I think it's about empowering citizens rather than doing things to people, and this is as much an education piece as anything else. So, part of the work that is currently going on, of course, this is an issue that affects all of us, but the solutions are also shared solutions. So it's about educating parents and guardians, it's about educating children, and it's about taking a collaborative approach to identify and solve the problems.
Okay, and seeing as this is concerning children, we've got some examples where children are protected by legislation, for example, from exposure to harm through tobacco, alcohol, etc. So do you think that protecting children from exposure to harm through the conduit of the internet is different from exposure to these other types of harm?
I think it's harder to control, isn't it? You can only get alcohol or tobacco from certain places, whereas virtually everybody has access to the internet in one form or another. So that's why it's about that education piece, and it's about teaching people how to use the internet safely and what to do when it goes wrong and who to alert when it goes wrong, and also to identify what going wrong actually looks like. Because so many people who operate on the internet, they're very devious in the way that they work and lure children and young people into activities that they don't even realise necessarily is harmful. And by the time they do realise it's harmful, they're already so far into it, they don't know who to turn to.
So do you think with these devious people on the internet targeting children that there should be more legislation to protect children? I
think we need to raise awareness of what the issues are, how people can be controlled and coerced over the internet. That's as much as important as creating new legislation. But certainly, if we look at the suite of legislation which is available through data protection, we can create and empower people to be able to at least take images off the internet in a short space of time. Because when we were at the NSPCC conference, we heard a personal story of a young girl who had been basically bullied into sharing indecent images of herself. And once she'd lost control of those images, the way that she was bullied and treated at school, she literally didn't know who to turn to. And it was really empowering to see that she'd found a way through it and she was now sharing her story to help other people.
And that's one
And we've
example where
got-
legislation is going to come in to,
But we already have legislation.
and it's being strengthened.
Yeah, we already have the Sexual Offences Jersey Law 2018 already protects children
So,
regarding sharing information, sharing images.
so we know that there's new legislation coming in around some of these offences and strengthening of legislation, but you don't think further legislation is the way to go?
I don't think we didn't say it was further
It's not the way to-
legislation isn't the way to go. We said particularly maybe not the Online Safety Act in its the way it's currently drafted, but bolstering up the suite of legislation that we already have has to be looked at, and you know, is that where we can start move towards to give people more protections?
I mean, we have some of our existing laws already are a good basis for protection. They're already providing a level of protection, even though they weren't designed for this specific purpose. And they are protecting children as well as adults. And I think retaining that flexibility by enhancing existing legislation, which should be relatively quicker than a complete new suite of legislation, I think I would say that is the way forward.
So, just generally, Minister, in your opinion, what is the role of the government in protecting children from online harms?
Well, the government, ultimately the government has a responsibility to protect children, and therefore must be there at the top of the tree, in effect, ensuring that happens, but also providing support for parents and helping them to know how they can protect their children and the children themselves. I went to a school only about a month ago for question time, and I was surprised that there wasn't a single question about mobile phones or online safety. And I asked the teachers why that was, and they said, well, you won't get any questions because the children already have a very good understanding of what they should be looking for, and the issues on the internet. So they said, they are already very well educated in what they should be looking for.
Minister, have you read the submissions to the panel?
I have.
So does that concern you, the submissions and what's in the submissions?
Yes. I mean, I've read the majority of the submissions, and of course, we can't deny that there is a lot of an enormous amount of danger out there. But I do think that the efforts to educate children in Jersey have been working.
I think,
And for a teacher to say that, I didn't say it.
I think, on the positive side, there has been a lot of media interest around this recently. Not just online harms, but addiction to phones. And I think that the whole issue is being discussed more openly than perhaps it has been for a long time. And that's a good positive conversation to have about where we need to go.
And I think the rise that we've seen in the number of cases reported to the police is part of that activity of getting people to actually report them. I think a lot of this has gone unreported in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's something that definitely needs to be dealt with,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes. But I don't think children are uneducated in totality about it. I think that education process is working.
But we can always do more.
We can always do more, but I think it's a sign that you know, that children are listening.
So does the global reach of the internet change the parameters of risk, do you think, in the harms that they're experiencing?
Absolutely, because in a lot of these cases, it is extremely difficult to tell where these images come from. They are pinged around various VPNs and all around the world, and actually finding out who's responsible is extremely difficult. In fact, taking down, you know, images that pop up, I can see that, you know, I think when you read the submission from Jersey Telecom saying how difficult it is to actually block specific sites and things of that nature, because you might be able to get the IP address and stop that, but if they're using a VPN, within minutes they can be coming from another IP address. So there is a lot of I think the technology needs to advance further so that they can actually, in effect, as the images are being electronically scan images, so that they, if they know that they're you know, pornographic nature, they can actually block them. Because blocking the IP address is in some cases futile. Very sadly, these people are you know, experts in their field.
So if I just add one more question before we move on to Deputy Parry's question. We looked at a particular case this morning where just recently in Jersey, an offender had been convicted as well. He had been contacting children through Snapchat, pretending he was a 16-year-old boy. And the result was some sexual assault offences. He actually managed to contact 382 girls in 1 week in Jersey. And he, just trying to think the right words. So do you think that children perhaps who might be quite vulnerable children as well are going to be well enough educated to be able to understand that this person is not a 16-year-old boy who's contacting them? There might be some children with some learning disabilities. So how would you protect those children?
Well, I think that's part of that is there's the platform. You've got the platform owners who to some extent should be looking for trends in things like that. If somebody has suddenly contacted 380 children in a week, you would have thought that that's abnormal. I know that, you know, people use the internet a lot, but you would have thought that they can use, just as they use algorithms to select our Netflix or whatever that we want, they should be able to use algorithms to actually spot potential predators.
Isn't this where legislation comes in?
Yes, that's where the legislation comes in, to force them to actually do that.
But you don't think that's necessary?
I do think that's necessary.
You do?
Yes, that's what I'm explaining. So, you know, we should be able to force the owners of these platforms to do these things.
But that was the attempts, the Online Safety Act in the UK.
But I would have thought our own legislation would be able to do that.
We haven't got any legislation.
We have computer misuse legislation already.
So you think that would be sufficient?
Well, it may or may not. I'm not a lawyer, but it's certainly something that needs to be looked at.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. Yeah, I do agree with you. There is a need to develop better systems. So, you know, we can get to people who are causing harm, but the legislation, as you both agreed just now, is also very important. So my question to you, Minister, is with regards to our last public hearing in October last year, our public hearing where you advised the panel that in relation to online safety, legislation is necessary as a tool, is useful as a tool. And you also did say that you are wholly supportive of a new local law. So in your opinion, should Jersey have a dedicated online safety law, or should protections be woven into the already existing laws?
Well, it's a mixture of both that they're intending. That they will have a law which enhances people's ability to have information taken down, but we will also enhance existing legislation. And I mean, existing legislation is quite good. We've already had a prosecution, as you probably know, for AI created images. And the fact that that law was, created some years ago, before AI generated images, I think just shows how well drafted those laws were in the first place.
Thank you. Have you been presented with any other sort of evidence that allows you to form those sorts of opinions, apart from the case you've just highlighted?
Well, there have been a number of, we have successful prosecutions for images, sadly. We have successful prosecutions for images relatively frequently, showing that, we do have that legislation. The Information Commissioner, I believe, can already take down or request platforms to take down images or content. So yeah, there is other evidence out there. Anyone else want to?
I might just, for the sake of completeness, the Children and Young People's Law 2022 talks about and gives ministers and also named accountable officers responsibilities and duties around safeguarding children and young people. And that law doesn't discriminate around online and offline. It applies to both. So just to complement what the Minister and Assistant Minister has said, there's been quite a lot of work done by the safeguarding leads to bring forward arrangements and look at operational policy that is keeping up with and reflects some of the some of the harms on those online platforms. And that work is ongoing. And you can see from, I think, the submission from the Safeguarding Partnership Board and NSPCC, some of the joint work that is ongoing. So I think that might be helpful for the panel to hear that.
Thank you. Would you say this particular approach you're taking, does it present any specific challenges in your view? Or do you feel, are you confident that the challenges are minimal and this is the right approach to take moving forward to have that combination?
I think it's a flexible combination. I think that is the advantage of the approach Jersey's taking, because in 6 months, in a year's time, we'll be looking at yet another version of what we're seeing today. And the legislation has to be able to keep up with that.
So the flexibility, you did say that talked about the benefits. Any challenges though, or on that sort of flexibility?
Well, we'd have
because
to.
obviously you would
We don't
be very...
know what's going to appear next, do we?
Okay.
So there could be a problem, in which case we'll have to deal with that. But, once again, we're not the law drafters. We can only tell them what the dangers are and ask them to deal with those. But I would say that the Jersey approach does allow that flexibility. It's interesting that whilst the Isle of Man and Guernsey initially asked for a PEC, neither of those has activated it, and you do wonder if they're waiting to see how effective the law is before they do that.
I think that's why they accepted it, so they had that backup ready in case they needed it.
Yes, I don't know the reasoning behind it, but I haven't heard anything about them doing their own legislation. In which case, if they find the PEC's not effective, they're behind. You know, they will be behind where we are.
Okay. So flexibility is
I
a
think
must in your view.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for your.
Sorry, Beard, just 1 second. Can I just say for members of the public who might be listening, could you explain what a PEC is, Minister, for the public? Permissive
Extent clause. So it allows us to be part of UK legislation. Of course, the other downside is, whilst you're part of the legislation, you can't change it.
Yeah, just for the public.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So could you, Minister, now discuss how the protection of children and young people should be taken into consideration during the development of the new legislation, resulting from when you take into consideration the work that has been done with the WAG report, shall I say? Violence against women and girls report.
Well, of course, the two things are connected. It's very often images of women or young girls that are on these sites, so I mean that is a major consideration in looking at legislation. That of course that is covered to the greatest extent possible. Again, the legislation is, we already have, as I said before, we've got the Protection of Children Jersey Law 1994. So if that goes back even further, but it does actually, it is effective in many of the offences that we're looking at. You know, you've got online stalking. In effect, that Protection of Children Jersey Law would cover you for that. Images, requests for images. That is a bit of legislation that is effective when we're looking at violence against women and girls.
Thank you for giving us that generic information. But yourself as a minister, will you be having a direct input on the development of that legislation as a children's minister?
It is. I will have some input. I have the advantage of being the Assistant Minister for Home Affairs as well, so relatively close to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a safeguarding, we have the safeguarding partnership. You've got the two levels, haven't you? You've got the Ministerial Safeguarding Board feeding into that. You've got the, do we call it the Partnership Board? The executives?
So you've got the safeguarding accountable officers who are
Yep.
named under the law, who have and the ministers have oversight of that group.
Okay.
The importance of those groups is they span across government, so they're able to, as part of because you would expect a consultation in and around those laws that we've been talking about that are being developed. So there's an opportunity to comment there, but for ministers. And I think the other thing that may be good to point out is that we have under the Children's Rights Law a requirement that any law being progressed by government and or backbenchers, it requires consultation with the Children's Commissioner and also needs to bring forward a child rights impact assessment. And I think those mechanisms are important in terms of capturing, if that's the right word, the rights components, children's rights components of those laws. And there's opportunities then to understand what some of those impacts may be, both positive and negative. So we're fortunate.
That's what you will be bringing from the Minister's Department, okay?
I think when you're looking at this, it's a slight but you're looking at the most vulnerable children being the ones who are likely to be pulled into this type of activity. You know, if you look at grooming and abuse, that vulnerable children, perhaps children that care, children that may have other specific needs, can easily be targeted, and I think that's an area that we need to focus on, because I think it's where 80% of the children, or 90% even, will be will be listening to the education that and become aware. But you've got those vulnerable children. That's a specific group for one that are more vulnerable than others that will get pulled into this, and that is where we need to concentrate our efforts.
Thank you, Minister. Could you please tell us of your understanding of any overlap between the digital economy work to make amendments to the data protection framework for Jersey and online safety protection for children and young people on digital spaces? What is your overall understanding of the
I
overlap?
understand that.
Okay, so we have got the online, the data protection framework of Jersey. We've got the online safety protection for children and young people in the digital world. What is your understanding of those three different,
I can answer that if you want.
Yes, do you want to?
So,
Which the
yeah.
digital economy work.
Yeah.
So, they will all work together.
they work?
But
Any
the-
overlaps?
Yeah,
in
there
your
will be
view?
overlaps, but the whole thing is about there's two pieces here. There's about changing our legislation to make it more robust and fit for the future, fit for now and fit for the future. And part of that is looking at the data protection framework, also considering any unintended consequences, because there are reporting mechanisms in the EU and they have been inundated with requests. So we need to make sure, firstly, that what we've got is able to cope with the potential for those requests, and equally that the platforms are going to respond to those requests. Of course, there's already lots of mechanisms in place, reporting mechanisms on all of these sites, where if you see something which is, disturbing or is fraudulent activity or whatever, you can self-report, and 9 times out of 10, that content will be taken down. Yeah, it does get taken down on a regular basis. Yeah, a lot of the time people don't think it does. That if you speak to the platforms, they regularly take content down every day. So a lot of it is there for a very short time and then it disappears. So there is already good, robust mechanisms in place, but we do need to make that better.
Was it 10.8 billion requests
Yeah.
had been recorded by the EU
By the EU in 6 months.
in 6 months?
Yeah,
There's an
so there
awful
was a
lot of
lot
bad
of content
material.
gets taken down. But combined with that, we also need to reach out to parents and caregivers, because yes, the most vulnerable children particularly do need to have good advice and good education. So what we're developing is, as part of the gov.j website, is keeping your child safe online, which is about open communication between parents and children, setting rules and boundaries, having good healthy screen time, and allowing people to understand what harmful content is and speak to someone else about it.
That's good, but I think Deputy Porrier's question was about the work being done by the Minister with the digital economy team as well.
Yeah.
So
So can I just add that it's a collaborative approach that's being taken, that the departments are working together to make sure that the
Yeah.
areas are aligned.
Do you feel could possibly be the conflict of interest between interests of businesses, the developing of the new technology, as well as protecting children and users?
I think there are lots of different parties around the table,
Yes.
and therefore there's a wide enough scope, enough people to be able to make sure that there is no conflict of interest.
So you agree that there will possibly be conflict of interest?
Potentially, but I don't think there will be any difficulties with that.
We have got this new group that we've
Yes.
brought
Yeah,
together
absolutely.
of the four ministers.
Yes.
So it's met twice.
Who chairs that group?
Digital economy.
Digital economy, yes, yeah.
So who is the chair then?
Well, on the occasion I think it was Moz, wasn't it? Because Kirsten wasn't there at the last one.
That's correct.
Scott.
Okay.
Yeah, Deputy Scott.
I think I may leave it.
Okay, thank you. I think that's,
You
that's
too,
over,
then, yeah.
over to me now. Just some questions around public engagement and a little bit more about legislation. The 2024 Children and Young People Survey results have recently been published. How is government using the information that's been collected about online behaviour and e-safety and bullying, etc.?
I can start with that. The information that we've collected is helping to support local policies and procedures. So the online safety policy, which isn't just for schools, it's across SIPE. So that includes obviously the Children's Minister remit as well. And the voice of the child actually is captured within that, and the online harms guidance as well.
So it's useful.
Absolutely,
Useful
it's a
tool.
useful. Particularly interesting is then to compare the results over the years to make sure then that guidance is really robust going forward.
One of the things that we do know is that survey's been dropped to every other year, where for donkey's years it's been every year. Do you think that's going to cause a particular problem in terms of your kind of longitudinal study stuff?
No, I don't think so. Not for every other year.
But if it went to more than that, it might cause more of a problem. Thank you. Some of the results were quite interesting and quite concerning. One of the results that certainly we've picked up is around the main source of information. And the survey said that the main source of information about sex for 15% of males surveyed was from pornography, compared to 2% of females. So the question is really, what role do you think there is for government in age verification and age suitability for effectively children who are accessing material that they shouldn't be seeing?
Well, I think it comes back to ensuring the platform owners are, have online age verification. My understanding is that currently it isn't particularly good, but there are concerns as they try to enhance it that in fact young people are then sharing personal data with the platforms, which again you might not want them to do. Passports with all the information on and exactly who's holding that information. But there do need to be more robust means of doing that age verification. I am not certainly not an expert in the field, so how that's developed, I don't know. Are you able to help at all? Or?
So that would sit firmly with the providers in terms of the age verification.
I mean, governments can they can put pressure on them in one means or another to do that. But at the end of the day, it is the platform owners who have to step up.
And what role do you think there is for things like PSHE to be, getting involved with the results of the Opinions and Lifestyle Survey? Because if we know that 15% of boys in particular are accessing this material, we know from what everybody's saying that we can't prevent the platforms. The age verification isn't working. So what else should government be doing, given that we know age verification isn't working?
I think you have to adapt the curriculum, what you're teaching, particularly if we know that boys are the most serious, where we're most seriously deficient in that area. Then you have to look at the PHSE curriculum and how you adapt that and what's more effective, and teaching them that really isn't the way to sort of get sex education.
And what role do you think the Minister for Children and Families has in supporting parents with supporting their children to avoid accessing these sites?
Well, I think the online material that we produce is our primary tool there. Obviously working with the Minister for Education, and obviously I can't speak for him, but obviously we work quite closely together. So therefore you've got you can go through the schools, the parents. As I say, we already have information online. We need to look at, I think the government is looking at actually enhancing that. And therefore the results of these surveys help in how we do that.
Thank you. And I think you talked last week in a different forum, but I guess the same about the online safety policy,
Yes.
Which will be forthcoming, and you've quite said it applied across.
And schools act in a dynamic way to respond to things like the questionnaire, and will enhance assemblies in information that they provide to children and the parents and the local communities.
Are
to support
schools able to get down into the granular detail from the survey? So is it done by school as well, if necessary? They can do so you can compare school against school with particular issues. Yeah, that's really good.
If I could,
yep.
it just build on your point,
Yep.
as well as providing insight for policy development. I think there's a strategic piece here. So the Children and Young People's Plan uses and draws upon the survey and uses it to understand where some of those trends are. You make a particular reference to a particular question. There are a number of trends that you can spot and see, and it's important to us to be thinking strategically.
And is the plan still using an outcomes-based accountability
that was my
framework?
next statement.
Sorry,
No, so because of the outbased
that we can
OBA, so that we can
monitor
have
the
an
curves.
understanding.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And then we can monitor that through the Children's Outcomes
Executive
Committee.
And an important part of that work is not only looking at the numbers, although they tell part of the story, is actually to talk to young people themselves. And I know that as part of the children's plan, we have, have a continuing dialogue with children and young people in the school council network. And I know that in November, we have already planned to be theming that around e-safety. And that will be done with colleagues and partners from the Information Commissioner, Joint Information Commissioner, and also schools and what have you. And we'll be asking questions and exploring some of that data and asking young people what their interpretation is of it.
That's good,
As
thank
a way
you.
of understanding.
Minister, in 2017, the independent Jersey Care Inquiry highlighted that Jersey had historically lagged behind other jurisdictions in updating its child protection laws. How are you going to ensure that our online safety legislation isn't similarly delayed?
Well, obviously we're not responsible for updating the legislation, specifically for online harms. But as I say, we've got a ministerial committee now that is meeting together, and I certainly wouldn't want to see delays. I mean, it's vital bits of legislation. We must improve on where we are. I would say, obviously, since the independent care inquiry, we have introduced, other legislation, and I would hope that, where we are now is sufficiently better than where we've fallen. There's been a number of children's laws introduced, and some of them give protection in these areas. As I say, some of the older laws need enhancing, but I would not want to see delays.
Okay. Because part of the lessons learned from the care inquiry included that the welfare and interests of children are paramount and trump all other considerations. As the Minister with responsibility for children, do you believe that principle is being properly applied to our modern challenges?
I think that is the case. I don't think there are any state members or departments that believe that this is something that that can be left and not dealt with. I think any matters regarding children have to be given priority. So I absolutely, that is absolutely paramount.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark?
Thank you. Minister, in a letter you wrote to the panel on the 10th of March, you advised that the Corporate Parenting Board, which we've already mentioned, the Children's Outcomes Executive Committee, which you've also already mentioned, and the Safeguarding Ministerial Group, again, already mentioned, are the bodies that have oversight of the key considerations that are relevant to the policy and practice regarding online harm. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the different areas of responsibility and key considerations for each of these bodies so that the public have a better understanding.
Well, the Corporate Parenting Board specifically is responsible for children in care. So that is that group and that group only. And there we would be looking at our controls over the use of the internet in our children's homes, where all but 2 of the homes have filtering software. Now the 2 homes that don't, there's probably are those where there is respite care and trying to think of the word.
Short
breaks.
Short breaks. And the children there are with staff 24/7. So there is not the opportunity for them to use.
Sorry, do they not? They wouldn't be with staff when they're going to bed, and they wouldn't be overseeing what they're doing then, would they?
Possibly not. I'm told that we are looking at cover for those, aren't we? But I think I think it's one that's possibly. I wasn't aware of that when I last came here. I've only recently become aware of that, and I've been assured that the 24/7 cover is sufficient. At this stage, but we are about to bring in filtering software. The problem that we have in all these locations is that children have smartphones and switch on to 4G and completely bypass any controls that we put in place. So the filtering that we put in is only achieve something when they're actually on our network. And there is very little we can do when they've switched on to another network.
So the next
4G network.
The next committee we want a definition on is the Children's Outcomes Executive Committee. Can you enlighten us?
Yeah, the Children's Outcomes Executive Committee, one of its main purposes is in effect monitoring the children's plan. And within that, there are sections within the children's plan that deal with safeguarding. So that's what ensures that we are following our plan.
And the Safeguarding Ministerial Group has a similar role?
Yeah, safeguarding partnership board. There's in effect two levels of that. There is a ministerial board.
Yeah.
And then there's the executive board, and they've got a wider remit over safeguarding, covering any type of activity.
One of the, if I may, Minister, one of the priorities that the accountable officers and professional leads are working on at the moment is updating some of the child protection procedures and policies and escalations. What's very important, as we've begun to rehearse in this space today, is about when you do suspect there is harm going on and there are children who are at risk, you want to be able to understand that very quickly. And where it's appropriate, you want to be able to escalate that, and that doesn't And those processes should be the same whether you're working in a school, working in the police, working in a children's home, or just working in a youth club. So that is a priority for this year, and I know that colleagues are working hard in terms of updating those. And again, those policies and procedures are blind to online and offline.
So on the safeguarding partnership, we have people from outside the government on that, don't we?
Yes, we have safe.
So in
Yes,
fact, we can, any concerns come into us, but
That's
concerns go out to them as well.
it's multi-agency
Yeah.
in its gaze. So
Can I just ask, so children who are staying in children's homes, especially if it's known that they've been targeted or may be targeted by some people into criminal activity or anything like that, do they keep their mobile phones in their rooms? Or are they not allowed to have, because of possible safeguarding concerns, are their mobile phones only kept with them when they're being supervised?
I think it would. I think you'd. I'm not 100, but I think you would have issues if you deprived them of their phone
But
and
just,
took it away from them.
but if there's known that they may
Police
have been
might
targeted,
be able to do that.
If there was a particular concern about a child, then that would be risk assessed. by-
Yes, there'd be a risk
because they
assessment.
often are targeted, aren't they?
If it's known, then there'll be a risk assessment put in place
Yeah.
around that young person.
I mean, some will have. There are cases where the police have removed their phones. So.
Is that due to suspicion of
I
criminal?
can't.
Or
you know,
is
it's probably best not that I can't comment on why the police might have deprived. You know, there could be a number of reasons why they would remove the phone from them. But I think that the phone is an instrument which is, you know, obviously good and bad. You know, we saw a case recently where 43 children in one way or another were involved in criminal activity, and people would say, oh, that's nothing to do with online. But actually, how were they controlled?
Through their phones. Yeah.
Through their phones, probably.
I think if the panel wanted to further detail about the specific operational procedures around
Can
residential
get
home,
that.
we don't have that on the panel now. But I'm sure
Perhaps if you could,
perhaps
yeah.
we could provide that after the meeting,
Yeah,
after the
thank
panel
you.
meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because there will be detail and there will be procedures. It's just that we don't have that detail
Yeah.
in the room.
Okay, thanks.
Minister, what discussions about online safety have any of those named groups made, and have they fed those back to you and your officers?
Oh, I've got to trawl through what we've.
Safeguarding partnership.
Safeguarders will absolutely have raised safeguarding issues with us, which we will have taken forward. I need to remember the other was the.
The Children's Outcomes Executive Committee?
Well, the Children's Outcome Executive Committee main purpose is in effect to monitor our.
Have oversight, and it meets twice a year. So the next time it meets will be in November, and we are scheduled to be talking about the big picture outcome for, which is about being safe and loved, and reviewing some of those programmes in due course. So.
Yeah, and the Safeguarding Ministerial Group, which obviously is
Yeah.
fairly obvious. Okay, thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you a question about children's services. Could you tell us about work that children's services have undertaken with the Safeguarding Partnership Board in relation to protections from online harms?
Right. Well, I suppose one of the things is the education of our staff, all staff, and the level to which they receive education on online harms will depend on their job, but that will originally have come through safeguarding. So, for instance, if you're a social worker or a residential worker, where you've got a lot of face-to-face contact with children and may well have things reported to you, or you may notice a change, you would get a different level of education in safeguarding to perhaps someone who's doing an administration role. But I think all staff receive
Yes.
Safeguarding, yes.
Training.
So that would
Education of
include
one form or another.
data protection training, cyberbullying training, and how to identify and report any aspects that they see online that are giving them any cause for
Am I
concern.
right? We've done
particularly.
some through the NSPCC.
Yeah, so some of those
We've had
trainings
some of those training courses are through the NSPCC.
are mandatory, and then
Yeah.
we have then on top of that profession-specific training, and then multi-agency training through the Safeguarding Partnership, and we've also got specific training that's been sponsored by and led by Safeguarding and SPCC.
I mean, many, just as a general aside, we get reports of, if cuts are being made, that sometimes those end up being on the training budget. Are you comfortable and confident that training is going ahead?
Yeah, safeguarding training would not be on any cuts.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Can you provide examples of how any existing government policies or strategies have been updated or changed to make considerations for online safety? That's now any changes that have recently been made. Because most of these laws and legislations go back quite a few years.
Well, they remain unchanged,
Well, indeed.
and yet they're effective as of today. Changes that we've made, I think some of the changes would be we've looked at the software in the children's homes.
Yes, we have. We're obviously making local policy changes and procedures, which I've already mentioned before, around the online safety policy. It's going to be quite a large document. And then subsequently the online harms guidance. And that's, again, for staff and so there's two versions, one for staff and one for parents and children. And that also encapsulates the voice of social workers to make sure that they have consultation and feed into that as well. I think that's important.
And finally from me, Minister, the panel heard last week, and we've heard this afternoon and throughout our consultations with other ministers, that this cross-ministerial group has been established to focus on online harms. What can you tell us about the terms of reference for that group and its plans going forward? I know there have been 2 meetings, but what is the terms of reference?
Well, in terms of reference, I'm not convinced we've written a term of reference as yet.
If I could help you, there isn't a terms of reference written. I think what the initial piece of work was about mapping all of the different connections in terms of the legislative programme, connecting the key ministers and officers together. I think the intention is to complete and finish that mapping and meet regularly as those different bits of legislation proceed for the reasons we've been talking about here today. But no explicit terms of reference have been pulled together as yet.
Thank you very well. If there are, I'm
Work
sure
in
the panel,
progress, but at least
the panel would be
to be
most
honest.
grateful for any
Yep.
terms of reference that
No.
ministerial group comes up with. Thank you very much, Minister. That's all from me.
Okay, I'll skip the next couple of questions because they could be better answered in writing, I think. So the next one from me is about the UNCRC.
Yep.
So can you describe how the Government of Jersey reviews its compliance with the UNCRC rights of the child?
Right, so I think Article 19 is one of the crucial ones.
Did you say review its compliance?
Yes. So, for
Compliance.
example, our general comment number 25
Yes, general comments number
is
25,
about,
yeah.
so also is about the digital environment, that children's rights apply fully online and it should ensure their protection.
So our Children and Young People's Law 2022 has set out senior officer and ministerial responsibilities for safeguarding children, and that's in line with general comment number 25. So in effect, the legal arrangements in that law don't distinguish between online and offline harms, but the responsibilities are the same. We have multi-agency safeguarding policies on children exploitation. How we monitor those, it comes to the Children's Outcome Executive Committee, which oversees our Children and Young Families Plan. Within that, we have material that is in line with the UNCRC. And in fact, each of the sections within the plan has the relevant areas of the UNCRC highlighted and how they tie back to it.
Okay, so one of the highlighted key areas in comment number 25 is ensuring access to reliable and age-appropriate online content. So how is Jersey complying with that age-appropriate online content? Joe?
I mean, are we back looking at age verification or?
Well, I don't know what.
No.
You tell me.
Because we've covered age verification, clearly we want to ensure that everything that child views is appropriate. Within our own children's homes, of course, the filtering there would try to ensure that everything's age appropriate. The material we have for parents and helping parents to ensure that their children are looking at age appropriate material is another way in which we achieve that. There is a certain element of parents at home that will have a responsibility for monitoring what their children are looking at. The government can assist them in that, but they are ultimately the people who are there with their children. But within our children's homes, we have the appropriate software there. Once again, of course, they can switch to 4G, and of course that's going to be an ongoing issue throughout.
So I think, if I may, the approach is there's a multiplicity of different approaches or layers. We've talked about supporting parents to play their part and understanding what they can do to help with age appropriateness. And as a parent, I know that's not easy sometimes. We've talked about technical fixes and solutions in order to keep young people safe. And we've also referenced changes in the legislation that are going on. But your question is about rights, and what sits above all of that is Jersey is part of the UK party in terms of the signatory to the UNCRC, and we take that very seriously and play our part in the rolling 7-year review of our commitment to the UNCRC, and we continue to do that. So I think we're doing more than one thing, and I think it's also tied into the conversations and discussions with young people. There's a constant ear for should we be doing more, and the nature and the extent of that risk, balanced with the nature and extent of some of the opportunities offered by the online environment. Is that helpful?
And we use the YES project as well, don't we, through the youth service?
Yeah.
That's another place where young people can go. You probably know more about that, Malcolm, but they are another source of education, particularly for young people and young people who may have been exposed to online harms, who perhaps don't want to tell their parents, but they can go into the YES project and talk confidentially.
The Youth Inquiry Service gives advice on all matters, and obviously online harms being just one, so they can advise people what they can do to mitigate the risk, or indeed give them advice or guidance if they're on a victim of online bullying or inappropriate content online. So that is one of the safety nets which is available for all young people in Jersey.
Okay, because I was going to ask next about how can children be involved in shaping digital policies that affect them, but so that can go two ways, presumably, in some of the projects. And I know you've already talked about that. We've discussed the surveys as well. So is there anything else you wanted to add about that?
Well, I think things that are raised in the YES project will filter through to policies via the youth service. So, increases in certain requests from children, certain matters raised, will filter through to looking, to our policies. And in fact, it's quite a good source of sort of knowing what children might be troubling children on a less formal basis than the survey.
And of course, children's rights impact assessments are really important to see how any legislative changes are going to affect children's rights as well as their responsibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Minister, how much data do you have about the prevalence of different types of online harm goes to children? And are there any areas that cause you specific concern?
Well, we have the latest information from the survey. You look at the data from the survey, and I'm probably more interested in the next one that comes out than the current one, than current information, because if you look at the current information, that what we've got, have you ever received a sexual video or photo? And this is between years 8 and 12. In 2018, that was, well, let's look at 2021, that was 36%. And it's dropped to 27% in 2024. But is that a real drop? Data can get skewed for all sorts of reasons. Likewise, have you ever sent a sexual video photo of yourself? Well, that's dropped from 11% to 6% in 2024. Whether that's really our education of children and highlighting the risks of these activities is getting through, or is there another reason for those having dropped? And so data's very useful, but in this case, I'm not saying that there's necessarily a success story here till we see the next one.
But to put it into context, I've got some numbers. So in relation to cyberbullying, approximately 19% of children aged 10 to 15 have experienced online bullying. Self-generated sexual content, a concerned 12-fold increase has been observed in the sharing of that sort of data. Online grooming exploitation, there's a significant risk of online grooming or sexual exploitation with platforms like Snapchat, which is very prevalent amongst young people. And of course, digital addiction and mental health we recognise as being areas of significant concern.
And that's why I'm not. We've got data, and it's the best data, but data that shows its percentages are falling. When you hear this, you think to yourself, has it really fallen, or is there some other reason behind that? Now, we've only relatively recently had this information, so there's a lot of work to go into, establishing why some of the results are as they are.
But is it fair to say that data gathering is very important?
It is very important.
And based on the example of the survey you've mentioned just before, will the data specific to children and young people be captured in the centralized database that is being developed as part of Violence Against Women and Girls Network? Because those are data specific to children. Will they be added?
That I would have to get back to you on that. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. Do you think more data should be collected then to capture the extent of any problem for children and young people?
I think
Further data?
I think we're looking at changes to some of the, or adding new questions into the survey, as a result of you know, the importance of safeguarding. I think we're looking at the next version having some changes, some specific questions around safeguarding that are different to those we currently have. As I say, I'm not convinced that the drop-off here is necessarily a true reflection of what's happened.
Fair comment. So where, for instance, incidents of online harm do occur, do you believe that there are protections or procedures in place right now for those eventualities? Or do the children tend to receive?
There are protections there for those children that report them. Those can be, you know, the police. They can be. They can get help through the Yes Project and counselling. So those protections are there. So I'm not concerned that we haven't got protections.
Okay, so on that sense then, do you believe that protection, available protection, is swiftly available when for cases like that where children come to harm?
Yes.
Are you confident with that?
I am confident that yes.
Okay.
And I mean, you could find cases where it is actually perhaps the most serious, where you know, a child could come into care as a result, and that would be very swift. You know, the director has an emergency 72-hour request that they can put in place where a child, and then it would be looked at the court within those 72 hours. So if it got to that extreme measure, yes, there is, yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Can you possibly give us some examples of what protection is there for children in Jersey who are subject to privacy violations? How are they protected?
Well, we've covered some of the legal protections with the data protection, the commissioner. There's, as I say, if we go on to the non-legal, which we've just covered, that you know there are you know, if it's something particularly concerning, they can go to the Yes Project, they can go to their schools where people are trained to deal with safeguarding matters. So you know, yes, there are definitely resources out there.
Are you at this moment in time making the most of the IE tools already available that can be put in place to ensure that children's pictures aren't exploited?
AI.
Artificial intelligence, sorry.
I don't know what tools have been put in place. I mean, it isn't my area. Are you able to help us with that?
Yes. So the tools I mentioned last week are available across some of our children's homes as well. There are different types of tools, but they are filtering contents. No tool is infallible. It's probably important to highlight that. But the tools are also adaptable. So once it's been highlighted, that type of image, for example, because the tools can pick out images as well and block them, and they can identify, to an extent, deep fakes, not necessarily in its entirety, and not always, again, as technology moves on and it looks more realistic, it's harder for the software to develop. But the software is also always developing.
Thank you.
It's always a little bit of a catch-up, but...
we understand that it's not an easy task at all, but it's one that we as a society, we have to get the grips of it, because it's It's about the safety of the children, really, isn't it? But thank you for that. So what protection is there for children in Jersey who experience cyberbullying in Jersey? So if we were to make an awareness to the public, what would you say there are the protections available?
So as you're aware that that the whole online digital harms guidance is being developed to encapsulate the voice of all of those different parties to address the most prevalent digital harms that children are experiencing, and then provide guidance for parents to support those children in the event that they experience any of those, or even better, safeguard them from experiencing those onlines to begin.
Thank you for that. Minister, how should we address risks of children accessing or sharing self-harm and suicidal related contents online?
Well, that's you know, that is a very serious area where, you know, the promotion of suicide and that type of thing, and I know that, for instance, you can't have a .je address that in any way is connected to that, and it would be taken down, I believe, if it was just you know again.
There'll be other platforms.
A lot of that has to be yes, via the platforms, by, you know, filtering certain words, and education as well. Once again, education of, you know, to you know, try to get children not to be influenced by these, and it is difficult. I would say it's you've got images, and with images, at least you've got something that you can take down or whatever. But these chat rooms which promote suicide are perhaps even more difficult to deal with.
It's almost promoting it,
yeah.
isn't it? Okay, maybe perhaps, I mean, that is something that you could come back to us.
Let's try.
If you could be more specific about, you know, how to address that.
How to address,
It is being addressed to some extent, particularly, obviously in schools, I've already identified that, but across children's homes as well. So with areas like mobile phones that children have, part of the redevelopment of the online safety policy is looking at those mobile phones, and whilst in care, enrolling them into a mobile device management platform to give further and greater insight of and safeguarding those children. Mm-hmm. So it is to some extent being addressed.
It's being addressed. Thank you. Are there any plans to introduce or update legislation to address legal but harmful online contents? Say, for instance, extreme violence or extreme harm, which is legal but is highly harmful for children who are exposed to those sorts of platforms. So, have you got any plans to date to introduce legislation to address those specific areas?
I know this was part of the Online Safety Act. I may or may not be right here that they actually had such difficulty with it that they actually removed the term legal but harmful.
Exactly.
Because it was so difficult to define.
Yeah.
But of
Between
course you
businesses
can
and
have,
obviously
you know,
children.
and this again is one line, you know, one area where age verification is extremely is vital, because, you know, you could have a scene from, for instance, you know, there are various conflicts in the world, and something that an adult might view could be very harmful for a child, and I don't know that our our legislation actually specifically covers online, but, legal but harmful.
It's a tough one.
Do you feel there
It's
is...
a very tough one because for one group of people it's legal, but for a child it's harmful.
Children need protection, I
yes.
suppose, don't they?
And so it does come back to a large extent to age verification on sites that would have that type of material.
I think it's also about the education, and I know that's not legislation, but in the work that we're trying to do around educating parents and young people, as well as the training for staff, is to provide awareness of those online harms, so there is a way to be able to deal with any of those situations should they occur, because it, as the Minister rightly said, it's much harder to deal with the images, etc., that are already there online.
I mean, I do appreciate that education is really important, but I'm actually asking about possible legislations as a way to reinforcing. So I'm not sure, maybe the Minister, would you be considering?
Well, it would be with the, it wouldn't be me, it would be the Economic Development Minister.
As a child minister, a children's minister, would you have an input on that?
It's the conversation that you
Yes.
had with them, wouldn't it?
Yes, but it was a conversation I'd have with him, but I think that falls within his area. The problem with online legal but harmful is that I think it does very much come back to age verification and having, the law that says this is legal, but it's legal for an adult to view, but not for a child, and enforcing that through the platforms is quite a difficult one. It's complex, and of course that's where the online harms bill then that difficulty resulted them actually removing that term.
I mean, the panel does agree with you. It is a difficult task to put in place, but do you believe it's necessary? It's worth
necessary
you looking into that?
It's necessary to protect children from that. How we do that,
It's enforcement is
it's
the difficult
enforcement. I think there are actually some of our existing legislation that probably does actually cover it. But I'm happy to, I'm happy if we take that up and we go back to the, the Economic Development Minister is currently looking at the legislation, so therefore now would be the time to incorporate it.
I just quickly wonder if you could follow up in writing with which legislation you think covers the...
I had a feeling that I'd seen one of our bits of legislation covered it at some point, so I'd have to go back through and try and find that. If I can't find that, we can obviously highlight that we are going to the, we're going to the Sustainable Economic Development Minister.
That would be good. We will look forward to get feedback on that.
To say that we're doing that.
Thank you.
I think you've just got time to ask.
Yeah, we've
Make a
just
note
got
of that,
a
Andrew,
couple
then
there.
we're going to go back and, but I'm sure one of our acts does already cover.
I'm not, we'll have to look.
Perhaps
We
we'll
may
follow
be-
up in writing.
Yes, but we'll have a look.
Minister, as always, this panel has received input from members of the public and parents in particular. We've received concerns, for example, about the impact of screen time on children and addictive behaviours resulting from digital device use. Where does the responsibility, in your opinion, sit for access to screens, particularly through mobile devices?
Well, I think it's a combined, once again, like much of this, it's a combination of doing this through education, but also to educating parents as well who have a responsibility in this area, because the vast majority of the time that they're actually on these devices is not necessarily when those children are in our care. So there is a big education piece there. And it is getting, post-COVID, of course, young people are spending more and more time on devices. I looked at the report that was produced post-COVID at the request of the then Chief Minister, as yet, I don't think that it really recognised the downside of. At that point, it was very much about, a lot of this is good, we must retain it, and I don't think it recognised the dangers of twofold. Obviously, the safeguarding, but also the amount of time spent on devices.
And the other question, of course, is about the content. We all know about algorithms, and you've just explained exactly what we are concerned about. Algorithms that choose our Netflix selections, etc. So who does the responsibility for that content? Where does it sit?
I've lost the thread here.
It's probably bigger than our reach, a lot of that, isn't it? That's the reality.
I'll tell you one thing that fascinated me. There was 10.8 billion requests into the EU, of which 50% had been dealt with by some form of AI-generated
just takes
response.
it down automatically.
So AI was being used to actually deal with some of the things created by AI.
Machine fighting
it's a
machine.
difficult world.
Exactly.
It is a very difficult world.
Briefly, what is your response to parents who might say, I need more help to protect my child from accessing certain content on the internet?
Well, we've got those. We've got that education for parents. We're enhancing that. The NSPCC, who we obviously work with as well, they have some extremely good material on there for parents. I've been looking at that, and we have a meeting with them in the next few weeks, don't we, Malcolm? So we're working with other providers to help parents, and I can understand it from a parent's point of view. Things that we found difficult in this discussion today, and saying, it's a big world out there, and this is a big problem. To a parent who's got concerns, it can be overwhelming in some cases.
We want to give more parents and guardians more tools to do the job, because we recognise that there are problems and they do need solving.
Yeah.
I mean, my youngest child, Minister, is now 30 years old, and I'm very grateful for that, that they're all of a certain age. But one final clarification. Do you think that another layer of protection from online harms could be provided through policies or legislation?
I don't think another layer. I mean, I think where we came back to constantly looking at legislation to try and keep up with what's happening. It's a bit like vaccines. Your legislation is only as good as the harms you know about today.
That's a good analogy.
But I don't think another layer would help. But I think the key thing is to keep on top of it.
Another vaccine would help.
Yeah.
I think we've run out of time, Claire.
Okay, well, I just have one last question then. It just comes up following something you said a moment ago about the possible addictive behaviours around screen use rather than the content. And I think you've said that's the sort of answers to that is education and parental responsibility. So in that case, when children are in care, as the corporate parent, how are you monitoring the children that you're looking after, their screen use time?
I'll have to get back to you, but I do think we have things in place to restrict the amount of time that they can be on screens.
So if you could perhaps
I
follow
need
that
to.
up.
The trouble is, some of them bring their own phones with them.
I was going to say, what
gets to
age
be
are children in the care of the minister allowed to have a smartphone?
I think there's a handbook.
There is a
that
handbook,
helps
isn't
with the
there?
residential.
I think we need to look at that, but
follow
We
up
do
in
have
writing
those
of
rules,
that,
yeah.
Be
Okay,
Yeah,
so
we can follow up on that, but there are rules in place about that. I had an interesting conversation with, last weekend actually, with a teacher, and there were a number of us there, and he said that he's now got children that, you know, find it difficult to communicate. And somebody said, oh, these are young children, aren't they, you know, at primary school? And he said, no, these are 17-year-old boys. And I think that sort of says it all. The consequence of being online means that they can't communicate well with each other almost without a device.
Totally.
yeah, and
We've lost the ability to actually talk to each other.
Converse.
we've also heard recently from every head teacher we've spoken to that
Right.
also small children coming into nursery are often having problems with communication. and social.
I've heard about small children coming into preschool with a toy phone,
Yeah.
which I think,
Sad, really.
unfortunately, is probably not, you know, is where we are. You know, even a child of sort of 3 wanting a toy phone because they see adults with one. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. That's it for us for today.
Friday afternoon.
No, other ones.